Meanwhile, I'll begin. So, very good morning. First of all, thanks a lot for being here. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me, IEEE, Professor Manhas, and others. Um, Now, this talk is a public talk which I have given at many places. Um, the content of this talk has been curated over the period of time based on the experiences I have acquired from interacting with many students, reading about their views on social media, or in those one-on-one or group interactions, including these kind of talks. Um, so here is a quick agenda of my talk, and there's a QR code. If you can take a picture, or you can you will have it in the end as well. This is an article that I had written some time back, and a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about, a summary of that is also covered in that article, if you're interested. So as far as the agenda is concerned, I'll first talk about what is PhD and why one should pursue PhD. Who should pursue PhD? And then of course, often the question comes, what are the global opportunities? If they pursue PhD, what are the global opportunities in India, abroad, what else, right? And then towards the end, so I'll first define what is PhD. I'll first explain you what is PhD, what is involved as far as the PhD is concerned, or the journey of becoming a researcher. This is better. So, journey of becoming a researcher, and then towards the end, I'll talk about the misconceptions, the myths, right, that students often talk about. So, I have collated a lot of misconceptions that I learned about, read about, discussed with various students, student bodies, various forums, and whatnot. And even from my own experience, long back, I pursued my PhD at IIT Bombay. And when I was a master's student at IIT Bombay, even from that time itself, I used to hear a lot of myths and misconceptions. And for me to decide that I can take a PhD position in India, I had to really break some of those myths and misconceptions, or tell people that, look, I don't want to listen to these myths and misconceptions. I'll come back to these things a little later. But let me start with explaining what is PhD, right? I mean, often the conception among students is that PhD is another degree which you acquire in 5 years. Somewhere the 5-year also comes in picture, and in that process you have to publish papers. That's what the general understanding about PhD is among a lot of students. So I thought, why not first clarify what is PhD? So as you can see, I put this in 5 different points, and I explain this step by step. So first of all, PhD is not a course program. PhD is a training program, right? The courses that you take, these are all requirements, for you to learn certain skills before you can get on the journey. So in principle, PhD is a training program. PhD is not a course program. Now, what is the difference between course program and training program? Course program, where the focus is on learning certain skills, acquiring certain knowledge, right? Acquiring certain knowledge means it's a predefined, right, pre-explored concept, and you're acquiring it. You're not asked to brainstorm it, you're not asked to question it, you're not asked to criticize it, you're not asked to think beyond what is being told, right? So in course programs like your undergraduate or postgraduate, BTech or MTech in Indian context, what you do, you learn what is already known. It's a different question that some of those things that you learn might not be true, and later on, if you pursue PhD or research, you can discover better theories or better things out of that. But at that stage, you're just learning what is being told to you from standard references, texts, experiences, right? And also you're acquiring certain skills, laboratory skills, hands-on skills, and whatnot, which makes you, say, an engineer or a better engineer, or in general, which makes you, say, a trained professional in a given field. Now that's the definition of a course program. You're not asked to think beyond what is told to you, right? Now PhD is a training program which trains you to become an independent researcher or independent explorer, right? So there, your focus is on learning how to explore, learning how to get on unknown territories, right? Get onto unknown trajectories, unknown journey, unknown things which are still, say, unanswered or unsolved, right? So PhD is a training program where you're learning to become an independent researcher. Now you will ask that, okay, then why there are courses in PhD or whatever? So these courses are basically, so I'll talk about that a little later, but in that journey, whatever problem, whatever topic you choose is a vehicle to get on that journey, right? So to drive that vehicle, you need to learn some skills, some aspects, so that you can get onto a journey. But fundamentally, PhD is a training program where you learn how to explore, how to research independently, right? Now, so if this is a training program, the question is when a degree should be granted. In course program, there's a fixed timeline, right? And your degree is granted when you basically show that you pass those courses, a certain set of courses, a certain set of laboratory training, whatever. Once you demonstrate that you have passed those courses, a degree is given, and usually these are fixed timelines. In PhD, since you are learning how to explore independently, to get a degree you have to show, or you have to prove, or you have to demonstrate your ability to research independently, right? Now, what do you do in this process? In this process of demonstration of your ability to research independently, what you do, you conduct research, right? And you conduct research in different phases. What are these phases? So initially, you work under very close guidance, right? So there are three phases. Initially, you work under very close guidance. Then you work, say, as a collaborator of whoever your guide is or supervisor is. And towards the work, you try to work more independently. So let me elaborate this. So in the beginning, you try to learn things from somebody who is going to mentor you. Say in the modern concept, that mentor is called PhD supervisor or PhD advisor, right? So in the beginning, you are going to work under very close supervision, where your mentor or your supervisor or your advisor guides you what problem to choose, what direction to pick, how to design experiments, how to start, how to analyze, and so on. So it's all training process, right? You are being trained by putting on that track. You are being trained to explore. You are still not an independent explorer. You are still not an independent researcher, but you have started exploring. You have started researching on under certain supervision. Now that is stage one. Stage two is when you have learned, say, how to explore. Now you have to become independent step by step. So that is the stage when you will be working on maybe a little advanced problem or a difficult problem or a different problem, but you will not be told that, okay, do this and do this, right? So you will be given certain directions, but you will have to take decisions from time to time. You will have to be involved more in your experimentation, experiment design, analysis, planning, whatnot, right? So that is stage two. And stage three is when you have passed stage two, then you go to the next level and you basically try to show that you can now drive the entire thing completely on your own. So the moment stage three is crossed, right, you should be given a PhD. Now, let's elaborate this, let's understand this. Let me first give you a simple analogy. So all of you know how to ride bicycle, right? and all of you were taught by somebody, right? Someone was there who was in the beginning, when you were, if you have learned bicycle when you were very young. So someone was there who was holding your cycle, right? Then the same person, would have left your cycle, making you ride the cycle without telling you that the person has left the cycle or has left the hold, right? And then towards the end, you are completely independent. So these are the three phases. In the beginning, somebody is just holding your cycle. You know that somebody is there who will ensure that I don't fall. Second stage, the person is there. You think the person is there. You think the person is holding the cycle. But it is the responsibility of that person to ensure that on one hand you are not falling, but on the other hand, you are also left to ride on your own without you feeling that you are riding or you feeling insecure. So that is stage 2. And last stage, when you are confident, the person feels that you are confident, he gives you a go ahead and try yourself, right? You fail, no problem. You fall, no problem. But go ahead and try yourself. So these are the three phases, and these three phases exist in all kinds of trainings. Whether you learn to ride a cycle or you learn how to research independently, right? So in the phase 1, you are under close supervision. Somebody is ensuring that you don't do a blunder, you don't burn the lab, right? I mean, killing some devices is okay, but don't burn the lab. Phase 2, where the person is keeping a watch, keeping an eye, right? You feel that there is a close supervision. I will not be, I will not fall down, right? But the person is giving you independence, and that is gradual in nature, that you later on realize that now you have become independent. So this is the process, right? Now let's see, if this is the process, right, there is no timeline. Some of you would have learned how to ride cycle independently in 7 days, some of you would have learned in 3 days, some of you would have taken 2 weeks, correct? The same way for PhD, there is no timeline. Often the students come and ask, oh, PhD is a long commitment, right? Or they would say that, oh, this institute, it takes longer than that institute. But fundamentally there is no timeline. All this 5-year, 6-year thing come from the timeline for the fellowship to be available, that you will not be unemployed for that period, right? But it does not stop you from learning things faster, graduating faster, right? So there is no fixed timeline. For some people it can take 3 years, 4 years, some can take even 6, 7 years. If you don't do anything, right, then nobody can train you. But if you are really aggressive, if you are driven, motivated, then nobody can stop you, right? So there is no timeline. It can be anything from 2 years, 3 years to 5 years, even longer, depends, right? And what it depends on, other than the motivation level, it also depends on the nature of the problem that you pick, the area, your own individual aptitude and ability to explore independently. Some people would have no aptitude in the beginning, right? Some would have certain aptitude from the beginning. So those who have certain aptitude from the beginning, those who have the ability to take risk or think a little independently, right, they would perform better. But it's not that if they don't have that aptitude or ability, they cannot perform better. They can always acquire that aptitude, and that is all part of the phase 1, right? So time it takes for phase 1 always vary depending on your initial conditions. Now, what about the byproduct? So in this process of conducting research and later on conducting independent research, what you do? You discover, you innovate, you invent, or find answers to some fundamental unknowns, right? Or fundamental unsolved questions. So this is what you do, right? So you have a conduct and you have an outcome. The conduct is that you are pursuing, you are exploring something, right? You are exploring some unknown, and the outcome is you possibly have an answer for that unsolved mystery or unsolved problem. Now, if you have an answer, what the scientific community usually do is they try to communicate the finding to rest of the world so that others can also get benefited out of it, right? And that is what we call a scientific paper or a research paper. So if you see, the research paper is a byproduct of this conduct, which is basically to communicate your finding with the rest of the world. The motivation was not a paper, right? Paper is a byproduct of basically your finding, and you want to just tell the whole world that you have discovered this. But motivation was never a paper. Motivation was to learn how to explore independently. And in that process of explorations, independent explorations, right, you will, if you have explored well, you are going to discover something, you are going to invent something, you are going to innovate something, you are going to find answers to unsolved mysteries. And if you have done that, of course you want to tell the whole world. And that's the paper, right? So again, there is no limit on how many papers, it depends. For example, you may start working on a problem, which is a very difficult problem. You cannot break that problem into bits and pieces. So the outcome of that problem could be communicated in form of just one paper, but that one paper might be, game changer. So one paper is good enough. Some problems can be broken into bits and pieces, and you possibly want to communicate the outcome at different stages. So then that results into multiple papers, right? So again, in that sense, there is no limit that how many papers you should publish as a PhD student. What is important is that you pick a problem that is difficult to solve. You pick a problem which everyone is trying to solve, and you solve it, right? So if you have chosen a relevant problem which the whole world is trying to solve, then doesn't matter whether you publish one paper or n number of papers. If the solution is relevant, count does not matter, right? Even, for example, sometimes it may happen that your paper is ready towards the end of your PhD. So your paper possibly is not accepted, right? Which takes its own time. And that's why if your committee decides, if your peers are convinced that what you have done is impactful, possibly even the paper being published is not needed, right? So why I'm pointing towards this? Because there's often a confusion that how many papers are required, how many papers I have to publish, how many papers I have to target. You should not target number of papers. You have to target solving a problem which is very difficult to solve, and that is to basically go through that journey of learning how to become an independent researcher, right? And that was my last point, right? There is no limit on how many papers one should publish. One impactful paper is many times better than many bogus papers, right? Now again, let me also point out this impact is not defined by the impact factor of the journal. This is also a myth. I have seen a chase between students that, okay, I have a paper in this impact factor journal and that guy has a paper in that impact factor journal. Impact factor of a journal does not decide how impactful the paper was, right? Your peers will decide how impactful the paper was. Sometimes, a paper in a low impact journal could be of very high impact, right? And vice versa is also true. I'll talk about that a little bit in my 2D talk. I'll show you one slide where there are at least 30-40 Nature nanoliters paper which are all useless, right? So if you want to know where to publish and all, as a starter, you can look into where the best mind in your specific area are publishing and where they are publishing impactful papers, right? Which the community says that yes, these are the papers which have changed certain course of action or certain things as far as the scientific or the industrial roadmaps are concerned, right? So now if you read all of this together, what do you notice? You see that point 1 is the definition of PhD, right? Point 2 is the core of what is the fundamental requirement of PhD. Point 3 is the process that one has to go through, those 3 phases and the timelines required. And point 4, about the publication need is the byproduct of the process or the byproduct to justify that you have gone through that process, right? Whereas the 3 is to justify the 2, right? And the last one clarifies the limit. Okay? So let's move on. So why one should pursue PhD? Now this is the definition. If you understand the definition, let's now understand why one should think of pursuing PhD. You know, there's often this confusion, even recently I had written about it, that often this confusion whether I should pursue masters or a direct PhD or settle with masters if I'm getting a job. So PhD is not, say, just another career option. There are other reasons, and that's what I'll talk about, right? So first of all, to train yourself to become an independent researcher. That's the very first point, right? You want to learn how to explore independently. Now, let me tell you that this aspect here is not just about becoming an independent researcher or explorer in a given area. If you have learned how to explore independently, you can explore any area, right? You can go through that entire process once again. For example, suppose today you have a PhD in semiconductor or solid state physics. But if you have gone through that PhD training sincerely, right, towards the end, if you have learned how to explore independently, tomorrow if you decide that I want to basically switch my field, I want to do black holes, you will be able to do that. Forget about science. You want to switch from science to social science, you will be able to do that. For example, what I am doing here is a social science problem, right, which cannot be addressed by scientific means, which also requires research, right, and a solution of a different kind, right? So if you learn to become independent researcher, you will be able to learn how to solve a problem independently, right? And it can be a problem related to science, social science, life, family, whatnot, right? Any problem that comes to you, you will be able to break the problem in bits and pieces, put things in a systematic order, come up with a strategic solution, and solve it. Of course, master an area independently. So, your training, your skill training up to master's level is always limited. So you want to grow in a certain field, PhD gives you opportunity to learn beyond what is often taught in course programs, right? And it allows you to grow in a certain area, and once you are on that trajectory, sky is the only limit. Also acquire expertise in a particular field. So, expertise will always be limited with your undergraduate or master's training. So if you want to become an expert in a given field, you have to get into a different trajectory. You have to get into a trajectory where you are learning to explore independently or exploring independently, and you are constantly digging deeper and deeper into that particular field, right? So if you have done this, then you will be able to push yourself to be counted among a few handful experts around the world. Now that's also very important. So as I said, PhD is not just a career option, that if I have to get a better job, better salary, better package, or if I'm not getting a job and maybe I'll do a PhD and get a job, right? That's not the only thing. If you acquire all of this, right, you'll be able to push yourself to be counted among few handful experts around the world, right? And if that happens, then you will certainly have an exponential career path. So career path is certainly there, that is not affected. And if you do it well, you will also be able to acquire an exponential career path. I have a slide on this later on, right? And as a function of all of this, you can certainly tap into a number of academic industrial opportunities and in future grow as the leader in your field, right? So two aspects. As far as the career is concerned, you can have an exponential career path, grow as a leader in that field, have n number of opportunities, then opportunities comes to you, you don't have to go to opportunities. But more than that, more importantly, you learn to explore, solve problems on your own independently, right? And that makes you different than rest of the crowd. Now it's also important to know that who should pursue PhD, right? everyone should not, and this is where you have to set a filter. And if you have some of these traits or aspects in you, then you should certainly think seriously along those lines. The first and foremost, very important, those who are curious and willing to explore. If you're not curious, if you're accepting facts as facts or accepting things as facts, right? If you're not critical, if you're not curious, right? If you don't want to know beyond what is being told to you, then PhD is not for you, right? You need to be curious. That is very important. Anything you see around, anything you look around, anything that you read, you should have the desire to explore further, to know more, to dig deeper, right? If you're not curious, then PhD is not for you. If you're not willing to explore, right? For example, if you have fear of unknowns, if you don't want to go on unknown trajectories, unknown routes, right? If you're not willing to explore, then PhD is not for you. But if you're willing to explore, if you think you are an explorer, if you think you like exploring new things, you think you like exploring unknown trajectories, unknown territories, right? And it's your curiosity which drives you to unknown routes, then you should be pursuing PhD. Also, those who are critical about anything and everything. Now, from critical, I don't mean that you should be skeptical. There's a difference between being critical and being skeptic. So, you should not be skeptical, but you should be critical. So, anything which is told to you, you should be able to put your own assessment and then accept whether it's a fact or not, whether it's true or not, right? Not accept everything. Anything that comes in your WhatsApp, you start accepting. हाँ ऐसा ही हो रहा है, right? So if you're not critical, if you just believe whatever is told to you, right? If you don't think critically before accepting certain things which are being told to you as a fact, then PhD is not for you. But if you're critical in a sense that you want to first assess on your own based on facts and figures, and then accept certain aspects as fact, then PhD is for you, right? Also, if those who are willing to get into the depth and learn complex skill sets. Now PhD is, so a lot of students come and tell me that I'm very motivated, very interested in doing PhD, but when you test them, they basically fail in a lot of skill sets needed, right? So just the motivation is not good enough, right? Just the passion is not good enough, right? You also need to have a willingness to get into the depth, the desire to get into the depth, the aptitude to get into the depth, and also the willingness to learn complex skill sets. And those things are usually tested when we interview candidates, when we talk to them, we figure out whether they are just saying good words or they really mean it, they really have it in them, right? So if you have the willingness to get into the depth, anything that you read, you feel that I want to know more, right? Anything that you see, you feel that I want to learn those skills, those concepts, right? Then PhD is for you. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to do that hard work, then PhD is not for you. Now, this is also very important, those who are willing to explore unknowns or uncover unknowns. So some people don't want to go on unknown trajectories, unknown territories, right? They are just okay, things served to them. And there are some people who want to explore unknowns. They enjoy it. They are passionate about it. So if you're passionate about exploring unknowns, at this stage possibly you would not have explored unknown scientific trajectories, scientific territories. But even if you have noticed yourself being interested in exploring unknowns, it could be any random place. I'm not talking about new shopping malls. Any random place, new place which you have never been to, you are not aware about, you don't have any guidance, and you think that okay, I'll just get in and figure out myself. If you have that tendency of I'll figure out myself, then PhD is for you. But if you think that somebody should tell me what to do, how to do, and every time you are dependent on someone to tell you how to do, what to do, where to go, then PhD is not for you, right? And this leads to the ability to take risk, right? So there's also one very important aspect. You should have the ability to take risk, try unknowns, right? But if you have not taken risk in the past, if you have always taken safer routes, right? Oh, this is what the average crowd does. This is what majority have been doing. This is safer. This will, with 99% probability will get me a job, even if that is an average job. Rather trying out that 1% route which will have a lot of risk involved, but if I crack it, I will have something far superior than many others. So if you don't have that risk-taking ability, if you want to just be part of the crowd, right, then PhD is not for you. But if you want to take risk, and if you have the aptitude and the ability to take risk, I'm not talking about risk as in, jumping from the cliff without any, safety measures, but I'm talking about calculated risk. I'm talking about risk which have high chances giving you something better than what majority get, right? So if you have the ability to take risk, if you have the willingness to take risk, try out unknowns, then PhD is for you, right? And on top of all of that, you should also, so during the PhD life, you should also have the following, for example, the urgency to explore. Say 12 in the night, you get an idea. You should have the hunger, you should have the urgency to think more on that idea, to brainstorm more on that idea, and if there's a possibility, go back, check in the lab, try out something, rather waiting for abhi kar lenge baad mein, right? So you should have the urgency. The urgency is very important, right? Then the discipline. Discipline is also very important. The research does not happen in a way where, one day you work 18 hours and then next 3 days you are just watching Netflix. You watch Netflix, but you also work. So you have to have this nice discipline in your work as well as life. That discipline is very important. And also a sense of detachment to be engaged in your research 24/7. Now that sense of detachment does not mean that, Baba ban jao. The sense of detachment means that while you are taking care of many things, while you have a lot of things connected with you, your friends, your family, right, relatives and whatnot, but your focus, your attention, your priority has to be in your research all the time, right? And that is the sense of detachment. So you're taking care of things, but you are not attached, you're not distracted by a lot of things around you. You need to be detached from many things around you, right, so that you are not distracted and you are attracted or attached to your research. And that is what should be running all the time in your mind, even if you're doing something else. Okay, these two slides I added based on some request students made in one of the talk. So opportunities. So, fundamentally I would say if you have done all of that and if you are on that kind of trajectory, opportunities will come to you. You don't have to apply anywhere. I can tell you that. You publish at best places, you present at best places, you work on relevant problems, the opportunities will come to you. You will not have to go to any place. You will not have to apply for jobs or any positions. People will reach out to you that what's your plan, right? What are you going to do after your graduation, right? You will not have to reach out to people if you have done well. But anyway, so since there's a lot of confusions among students, let me talk about that. For example, a lot of people think that PhD means ab to professor hi banna padega. So that's not true. PhD does not mean that you have to, you have only an academic career available for you, right? So, for example, you have opportunities in academia. If you have done well, a lot of places would also call you for direct faculty position rather looking for a postdoc experience. You can also do a postdoc or take up a faculty position. You can also do a postdoc and go to industry, or go to industry and then become a faculty. I did not do a postdoc, I worked in industry, then came back. So you can directly go to industry, you can take up industry position, right? You can directly take industry position in India, abroad. You can also, as I said, do postdoc, then take an industry position, right? Of course, government labs, R&D labs worldwide. And last but very important, startups. So if you have gone through that journey, you would have learned many things. You would have learned to handle many things on your own, right? And all those traits become very important running a startup. In fact, I'm telling you, in current days, becoming a faculty, running a lab independently and running a startup, there's no big difference, right? Even as a new faculty, खुद से lab में झाड़ू पोछा लगाना पड़ेगा, एज ए स्टार्टअप फाउंडर खुद से कंपनी में झाड़ू पोछा लगाना पड़ेगा, राइट? Your professors are smiling. Okay, let me also tell you, and this is something which often students have asked. There's a misconception that there's no difference in the if I just want to do industry, then there's no difference in the salary and all. So for that I have a slide here, and this is what usually happens. So suppose you graduate with a BTech degree, you join at say a salary X. You will have some growth and eventually it stagnates. This number can fluctuate a little bit up and down depending on the area, computer science versus hardware, right? But this is what the trend is. Now you have a master's, you join after 2 years at a little higher salary, right? But you will have the same trend. Eventually it is going to stagnate. You spend few more years, you take up a PhD position, you graduate with a PhD, you join at a much higher level. So there is a difference, but then the trajectories are different. Now here, there is no stagnation. So you will have opportunity to grow, and the time constant for this growth is dependent on how good you are, how motivated you continue to be. So this is, some students, I think it was some NIT where students asked me about the ROI. And so I explained this orally, and then I thought I'll just draw something and add a slide. So this is the ROI. You are investing 4 or 5 years extra. You start with a higher jump, and you don't have a stagnation. You have a better growth. Now even if you do the area under the curve, you know that at this point, the area under the curve for PhD is better than the area under the curve for masters or area under the curve for BTech, which is basically the savings, right? And of course, you have a better growth afterwards. So as you progress further in time, the area under the curve gets better and better. Whereas for others, it saturates. I mean, the area grows linearly, but your growth saturates, right? So that's also very important to know, to address the misconception that PhD means you have to die poor. You do not need to die poor, for sure. Now, this is the last part of my talk, which is the more exciting part, the myths and misconceptions. The very first myth, which I have heard for many years, even when I decided to continue PhD after masters. PhD you do if you don't get a job. This is not true. I mean, I'm not talking about outliers. Yeah, there can be people who can take advantage of the system. They would not have a job and they think that, okay, I'll take up a PhD position because I'm not getting anything else to do. But PhD is not, in general, PhD is not something that you do if you don't get a job. So if you look into the good PhD students, good PhDs, they wanted to become a scientist, a researcher, explorer, and they are doing PhD not because they did not get a job. In fact, many of the good PhDs would have a job, would have a position, and they would have left it, right, and continued for PhD. So if somebody tells you, now why I'm talking about this, right, facts are facts. The reason I'm talking about this, but because a lot of students become apprehensive of doing PhD as in what others will talk about them. This is what is common in our society, right? So if I decide to do something and if the common perception about that aspect is bad, then I'll be tagged with that bad perception, right? That if I am doing PhD, then others will think that अरे इसका job नहीं लगा होगा, that's why he's doing PhD. And because of that thought process, a lot of people don't want to do PhD or are scared of doing PhD कि लोग क्या सोचेंगे. I give a layman example for this. So, I mean, you know that in some of the states, Indian states, dowry is a problem, right? So the mindset in those states is that if you have not taken dowry, something is wrong with the boy. कुछ तो problem है, which they are hiding. That's the mindset, which further promotes this dowry culture. Now let me ask you that, will you take dowry just because of this mindset? No, right? You will not promote dowry just because if I don't take dowry, what others will think about me? Others will think that something is wrong with me. There are some fundamental problems with me, right? The same happens here. I wish to pursue PhD, but then I am worried that if I pursue PhD, a lot of people, relatives, neighbors, whatever, will say that iska job nahi laga hoga. That's why he is doing PhD, right? This is another misconception. PhD means publishing papers, and I have seen, the race from the very beginning. Students start, how many papers, that guy has published, this guy has published, how many papers I will have to publish. These are the first set of questions when they land, as a PhD student in a particular institute, and these are the common questions asked by the first year students to their seniors in hostel mess. कितने पेपर पब्लिश करने पे PhD मिल जाएगा यहाँ पे, right? And as I explained in the beginning, there is no count. It could be 0, it could be 1, it could be n, doesn't matter, right? Fundamentally, if you have gone through that journey, if you have proved your ability to conduct research independently, you should be awarded PhD. And all these number of papers is all byproduct. It could be anything depending on what you do, what problem you choose. PhD takes too long, 5 years or more. This is also generally a misconception, and I think I addressed this in the beginning, that the timelines are dependent on how aggressive you are. I finished my master's and PhD in 3.5 years. So timelines are all dependent on how aggressive you are, right? If you don't work, even Brahma cannot give you PhD. And if you are very aggressive, nobody can stop you, right? So this is unnecessary misconception, and that is derived out of the fact that the fellowships are available in Indian system for 5 years. Now this leads to a lot of these discussions that Europe में तो 3 साल में मिल जाता है, right? A lot of universities in Europe give PhD in 3 years. Now I'll be cautious because it's not getting recorded. So what happens in some of these countries is that the universities, they don't have the PhD process in this particular fashion. I'm not talking about all the universities. Even in Europe or whatever other places, the top universities are doing well, and they basically train students the way they should be trained. But then there are many tier 2, tier 3 universities who are also offering PhD, and what they do is they basically become the front to recruit people from foreign countries as cheap labor. And then they are sent to industry. So what happens is that you are recruited as PhD, then you are sent to industry as an industry PhD. You will never see an advisor except once in a year for some review. You will work as a part-time employee in that industry doing day-to-day kind of jobs. And somehow in the end, a thesis will be compiled and a PhD will be granted. Now, if you look from the migration perspective or job perspective, if you have done reasonable, they will acquire you. If you have not done reasonable, they will fire you, then you have no job nowhere in the world. If you're done reasonable, they will acquire you. So from migration perspective, it works well for many people. They they can migrate, they settle there and all. But fundamentally, you're not trained as PhD. You cannot do independent research. You go anywhere else, you're not accepted. As far as that company is keeping you, paying you salary, you are fine. But you want to go to some other place, you want to do something better, you want to come back to academia, you want to go for a better position, you're not accepted, right? So this is the problem. And a lot of students in our system, basically they even on social media I see a lot of these writings. A lot of students who were not even selected in our tier 2 systems, they would go to some of these universities in Europe, and then they will write on social media that India is, you guys don't understand talent. See, I am now in Europe and all that nonsense, right? And that is because that 3 year versus 5 year, Here we evaluate, we test whether they are capable of doing PhD. There they would like to have more and more people, right? Because they are getting money from industry for no job to be done by the universities, right? So this is also one of the problem where this whole comparison comes, 5 years versus 3 years in Europe or 3 years at some of these places, right? But on average, I can tell you that if you want to do good work, right, you need time, right? And if you do good work and if you're aggressive, you can reduce that time completely on your own. So this is also something I have often read. Some people write advices on LinkedIn that why you should not pursue PhD, like I am advising why you should pursue PhD. There are people who advise why you should not pursue PhD, right? And then one of the point they say is that, what is the guarantee that you will get results? What is the guarantee that you will be able to do something? And if in 5 years you cannot do anything, your 5 years are wasted. Now that is not true. If you are sincere, 5 years is a very long period. If you are sincere, motivated, if you have done sincere work, something is certainly going to come out, and in that process you would have certainly learned, how to explore. So tomorrow when you go for a job, right, say you apply for industry position, they are not going to count your papers. Even if you have no paper, but if you demonstrate your ability to conduct research, if you demonstrate your ability to analyze, if you demonstrate your ability to think, right, if you demonstrate your ability to work independently, you will be hired. But I've seen a lot of times, people apply for positions, I have 15 this paper, 20 SCI paper, and they are useless. A lot of these students come from some of these Chinese universities, a lot of from Taiwan, Japan, right? They have a lot of papers, but no training, right? So if you have done well, the 5 years are not wasted. But if you have produced only numbers in CV and not learned anything, then certainly those 5 years are wasted. Now, there is also a misconception that PhDs can only become teacher professor. That is completely wrong, right? People think that there are not much opportunities in industry. That's completely wrong. I'll give you my example. When I was in both in Intel as well as, actually all three places, Intel, Infineon, IBM, the entire team was PhD. The entire team was PhD. In fact, let me elaborate on this example. I myself, for example, in Intel, I myself and another person called Christian Roos, who was IISc graduate, except two of us, all others were physics graduates. So only two of us were electrical engineer by training. Rest everyone had a PhD in physics, either condensed matter physics, solid state physics, even one having PhD in theoretical quantum mechanics. Theoretical physics and aspects of quantum mechanics. But they were doing semiconductors. How they could do semiconductor? Why Intel hired them? They did not do a PhD in semiconductors. So Intel did not hire them because of certain skills. Intel hired them for their aptitude, right? Their understanding, their ability to explore. And of course, then they grew in a different field, in semiconductors, right? So this is also a wrong perception. If you have a PhD, you can actually do many things. I talked about the opportunities. Being a professor or academician is one thing. Now, this is also another widely discussed topic. Stipend or salary is not enough, right? Or stipend is not enough for gaining financial independence, so why should I pursue PhD? I am not treated well, I am not paid well, right? Now, let me tell you, PhD is not a job, right? I know some of the PhD students will not like my statement if I say that the stipend is reasonable. But let me elaborate this. PhD is not a job. PhD is a training process, right? You are here or wherever you go, you are there to learn, to become independent researcher. This is not a job. You're not hired, right? You're not hired to do a certain kind of job. All the job you do in lab or the the topic you choose or the explorations you do in lab is basically a vehicle to go on that route. You have to do something to learn, right? Even if you want to learn cooking, you have to cook. You cannot learn cooking by watching, some XYZ on YouTube, right? Trust me, it does not work. You have to cook. You have to fail. You have to cook. You have to again fail. You have to cook, and eventually it will work out, right? So PhD is that process. You are learning something, right? So you are there to learn, and you are being paid a stipend to ensure that you are financially independent in a sense that you don't have to ask money from your parents. But that is not to feed a family. That is not to basically start a fixed deposit or recurring deposit in bank. That stipend is not to buy a plot outside IIT Roorkee campus. I don't know if there's any, right? So in that sense, the stipend, if you have enough money to take care of your expenses, not asking money from your parents, right? And still you have enough saving to chill out on weekends, you should be happy. At my time in IIT Bombay, the PhD stipend was 8,000 rupees, 8,400. And after all the fees and everything, we were left with not more than 2,000 rupees. Still we were happy. Because this thought process, of course, the social media was not there, the YouTube was not there to that extent. So nobody was telling us from outside that you are not paid well. There is an injustice with you. Leave your PhD. You should not do PhD. Now there's a lot of distraction, a lot of people, tell all of this on social media, and students get biased. And some go and protest, right? But let me also tell you that those who are sincerely interested in that particular route, they don't complain. Who complains? People who are looking into PhD as basically opportunity because in the beginning they did not get a job. Okay, so this is derived out of this. PhD is a research job with almost zero payment. Even recently there was an article in Nature, PhD scam, which I would disagree. It's not a research job, it's a training process. If you take it as a training process, then you will understand that the institute which is training you is investing lakhs and crores on you. So in my group, for example, so all the consumable, facility charges, whatnot, every student I spend at least 5 lakhs per month. So my investment or institute or government's investment per student is almost 50 to 60 lakhs per year for 5 years, even if you take a Gaussian distribution, right, roughly around 2 crores for the entire training period, right? That's also an investment. Now this is something which students don't realize. Nothing comes for free. Somebody is working very hard to raise money, right? And helping his students to learn, train. And in that process, of course, we do a lot of good science, right? This was the article, Scam of Underpaid Job in Nature. Now, this is also, I already gave you this example of European universities where people compare the salary, stipend, the timelines with some of the European universities, and I already told you in some way a scam from certain European universities. People also doubt those who don't get PMRF or some of these fellowships that these things are not transparent. Being in some of these committees, I can tell you that subjective evaluation is not always easy, but the committees always try to keep it as fair as possible. Everything can be transparent. If it is not transparent, does not mean that it's not fair, right? Sometimes things are not transparent or not publicly disclosed just to avoid problems. But I can tell you that those things are fair, and you should certainly try for that. And if you look into some of these schemes, fellowships, there are enough fellowships available which can help you, jump your stipend. So if you have PMRF, for example, you get 2x stipend, right? And that basically makes a difference. Now, also think from the government point of view. If government has to increase the stipend, they will have to increase stipend for pretty much everyone in the country. Now, you also know very well that there's a grading system. Every PhD or every institute is not doing equally well. IITs might be doing well. You go to tier 2, that comes down. Go to tier 3, it further comes down. But stipend cannot be graded, right? And therefore these additional schemes where those who are good, they basically get additional benefit on the merit basis. Now this is another very big conception. PhD in India is different from doing PhD abroad. Now there is a related question. Okay, there's a related question to this, is we don't have better facilities, right? So let me tell you that PhD training is not country specific, is not institution specific, is not facility specific. Of course, the role of mentor is important, so you have to choose the right mentor. But the bottom line is that facilities, infrastructure, money does not drive research. What drives research is idea, passion, rigor, right? And the involvement into a thought process, into an idea, right? Whether you have facilities or not, it does not matter. You may have great facilities. That does not mean that you will become great researcher, or you are going to your institute or your group is going to produce great research. I'll give two examples. One example is derived out of a question that was asked to me by one IISc faculty when I was giving this talk there. The question was that shouldn't you point your gun towards the policy makers that they should improve the facilities in the country to improve the research? And I told him that if you look into the facility creation or the money being pumped into the system in last say 15 years, right, it has only gone up, right? I mean, say 15 years back, we did not have much facilities. Some of the nanoscience facilities, nanocenter facilities started way back, almost 15 years back. Today, there are a lot of facilities, a lot of good facilities across the country, right? So if somebody tells me that the research level has gone down, right, or the students are leaving for positions abroad because we don't have facility, then I don't see a correlation. And as a scientist, as a researcher, I would like to see correlation. If I don't see a correlation, then that whatever argument or hypothesis given is not correct. So certainly last 15 years the facilities have improved, the money has improved, but the brain drain has also increased, right? So certainly there is no correlation between the brain drain or the fact that India, we cannot do good research in India, therefore I should go abroad. I don't see a correlation, right? The other question is basically whether facilities drive research, or what should I look for when I'm deciding where to go for PhD. So first of all, facilities don't drive research. You can have great facilities, that does not mean that you are going to produce great research. I can tell you that a lot of Indian institutes have very similar facilities than many institutes in US. And the institutes in US are producing better research than institutes in India. It's a fact. Recently, I took some of my students to, I was invited to give a talk at Stanford and UCLA. 14 of my students were traveling with me, so they also joined. They saw the facilities, Stanford, UCLA, very similar to what we have in IISc. And I asked my students, tell me why, they are producing better research or better results compared to overall IISc, right? And the answer lies somewhere in our thought process. We always think that what we do here, or if we do something here, we cannot produce anything better than rest of the world or others. And that subconsciously limits our ability. If we don't limit ourselves, if we don't question our ability, if we don't limit our ability, we can certainly produce better. But that doesn't happen. Often we live in this negativity that India mein hai to ho nahi payega, won't work, won't happen, we cannot do better. And that subconsciously limits ourselves, right? Now, this is also something I have seen, think twice for leaving industry job for pursuing PhD. Some students Now, some students think that let me first gain some experience and then I'll come back. And once they have got into a job, they think that, yeah, it's a risk. I don't want to take that risk, right? What if I don't get a job after PhD? So of course, first of all, those who think along those lines should not be doing PhD, because you have to take risk if you're doing PhD. And if you're not confident about yourself, right, then what's the point of doing PhD? But along these lines, if you have done well, you will have far better opportunities after PhD than what you would have at the time of leaving industry. Now, this is also something which students often say, I have a job, so why do I need to study more? And I think I have addressed this directly, indirectly in all the explanations I have given so far, right? Now, this is also something I hear often. My PhD is in, I work on devices. So in devices, there are these 3-4 different areas: fabrication, characterization, simulation, modeling, right? So students say that my PhD is in fabrication, characterization, simulation, modeling. And let me tell you that these are just the vehicle, right? These are the skills that require to basically follow a certain path. These are just vehicles, right? PhD is not in a skill. PhD is PhD. A skill is you acquire to basically follow a certain path, to go on a particular trajectory, to learn how to become independent researcher. Now, PhD is an extended project work. That's also not true. PhD is not a project work. PhD is not a job, right? PhD is not a research job, right? PhD is not a 2 times MTech project. PhD is PhD. PhD is a training program, right? Rest everything is part of the process. PhD candidates in India mostly suffer from funding shortage. They think that PhD funding need to be raised by students. That's not true. Funding has to be raised by the faculties. You don't have to worry about funding or funding shortage, right? And fundamentally, as I said, the facilities don't drive research. You may have great facilities. If you don't have an idea, if you don't have aptitude, you will do nothing. You may have very little facilities, but if you have great ideas, if you are thinking deeper, you will produce great results, right? You know that 100 years back, the world produced a lot of great scientists. There's a picture in electrical engineering department on the wall, highest IQ picture. All those people were produced in that 30-40 year period. And you know that 100 years back, the facilities were not as advanced as we have today. How come they created, they discovered, they made great inventions, great discoveries that the people of today's world are not able to produce? They did not have facilities. Einstein never operated a SEM or TEM, right? This is simple one. MTech is a must for PhD. That's not true. You can do direct PhD. In fact, a lot of students, a lot of undergraduates don't know this, that you can do direct PhD. There's no requirement for you to first do a master's, then PhD. In fact, if you are clear that you want to do PhD, you should do a direct PhD. So I have industry experience, so I'm better suited for PhD. This is also not correct. I have seen a lot of students come in interview and they say, they think that since I have some industry experience, mera to aise hi ho jayega. That's not true. You may have some industry experience, which is basically, you may have some skills of operating some tools, software, hardware, whatever, but that does not mean that you are made for PhD. You have to go and check all those criteria which I talked about. Now, this is also some naysayers talk about some negativities, that PhD is all bookish idea. People think that, some people think that PhD is, it's like you read something, you write something, you make a thesis, PhD mil gaya. So I think I have explained this very well earlier, from that PhD is not a bookish idea or something where you lack hands-on experience. And this is also something with a lot of these graduating BTechs or MTechs think, that they should first gain some experience and then do PhD. There is no correlation between having some external experience, work experience, and then doing PhD. PhD is not a job. Okay, this question comes here. So lack of instruments and facilities, should this be a concern? So I think I explained this already. In the end, I must highlight that your ability to do good research completely depends on you, and not a function of how much money is around you and how much facilities are around you. If you are driven, if you are thinking deep, you will always find a challenging problem to solve, independent of how much facilities are around you. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop here. If you want to read that article, you can take this picture and later on you can download this article. And I'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay. Question? Ask questions. Don't worry, just ask whatever.
Nobody is judging you here. That's the first thing. You want to do PhD, then you should be clear that nobody is judging you, and even if somebody is judging you, you should not care.
This is the major barrier hesitating.
There are a bunch of defects here also. There are to ask questions. Don't worry, if you ask questions, you don't have to do PhD, no? Don't think that if I ask questions, maybe this person catch you and take you to IC Bangalore for PhD.
Yeah.
As sir mentioned that I also BTech undergraduate. So you mentioned a point that if we are clear on doing the PhD, we should not bother going for a master's and directly go PhD. So as a matter of information and knowledge that we have, is it advisable that we do a direct PhD from a BTech perspective? If we are clear on that doing the PhD is what we want to do.
If you are clear you want to do PhD, I would advise do a direct PhD. Now, if you're thinking that what about that learning that will happen during the master's period, so usually the programs at most of the places are designed in such a way that if you're a direct PhD, you will be asked to do extra coursework. So, that aspect of learning is not missing. You will still learn everything, but what will happen is that you will not go through that, phase of, so this master's project, you think of that master's project as phase 1 of PhD. Right, or maybe half of the phase 1 of PhD, right? So if you're anyway going through that phase 1, complete phase 1 and then phase 2 and phase 3 in PhD, then there's no point of doing half of that phase 1 and again doing the phase 1, right? And as far as the coursework is concerned, you will be asked to do extra courses, right? For most of the places would have double the coursework requirement if you are a direct PhD versus if you are a PhD after masters. So your courses are taken care, your skills required are taken care, right? And then you directly jump on choosing a problem and you start working. And I can also tell you that earlier you start, you want to do PhD, earlier you start, younger you start, you will do much better compared to starting at a later stage. At a younger age, you have much better aptitude of, or ability to focus on certain thing. Compared to a later stage where you will have other kind of distractions. I'm not talking about social media distractions, but other kind of distractions, society, family, this, that, and that don't exist at younger age. So sooner you start, better you will do. Right? You will not have any worries of that you are aging and so on.
Also, as a selection procedure, does a master student is preferred over me and
No.
BTech does he or she has the same chance?
No. For example, if you see my group, out of 30 students, including those graduated, I had more direct PhDs than those who joined after masters.
For BTech, if you have, I think, GPA of 8, you don't have to have 8 or anything. You can directly apply for PhD program, including this PMRF. PMRF is all of you, probably many of you will know, it offers a scholarship of 50,000 per month. So in fact, you are interested, can explore this.
So, wherever you want to go, I'm not saying that you pursue one place or the other place. It can be your choice. But you want to do PhD, then there's no need for you to choose masters first and then think of PhD. You can directly go for PhD.
Sir, there's an online question.
Mm-hmm.
If someone enrolled in PhD in NIT and again get PhD in IIT, is it better to be in NIT and join in IIT?
Okay, let me generalize this question before answering this question. So if I'm doing PhD at one place and if I have better opportunity, and better is a relative term, but the person who is seeing this as better opportunity, should he or she leave for better opportunity? I think a lot of people are going to advise him or her that, yeah, go for it. A simple answer would also be go for it, but I would say that you assess whether you have the right guidance, right infrastructure at your place. And if you, so it's not NIT versus IIT, it can also be say IIT versus something elsewhere, right? So first you assess whether you have the right guidance and the right problem statement to work on. If you have it, there's no need to leave. And if you don't have it, then of course you go and look for better problem statements and better research environment, better research ecosystem. See, it can go both way. There cannot be a generalized answer to it. It all depends on the circumstances, right? But there's no harm in looking for a better problem statement, better place to conduct research. But if that place is also offering good ecosystem, right, and good problem statement, then just because somebody tells that okay, this place has better ranking versus this place, should not be the reason to leave the previous place.
Okay. Any question? Any more questions? So if there are no more questions, then let us first of all please thank Professor Shrivastava for